without further ado, you already know who they are. Come on up, Imani and Kelley Robinson. Come and join us. Do that too and get out. Awesome. Okay, so this is Kelley's second time sitting with me, and when we first met, it was
cathartic. I didn't know I needed it.
My goodness. It was so good. But you knew it was good because she walked in and she had these leopard print flats on and a green dress, and green is my favorite color, and I had leopard print slingbacks.
You did?
Yes, and that's why I was like, I must wear shoes.
And look at these shoes.
So, yes.
Yes.
Hey. I mean, but hello, Kelley, have you ever seen sequin comfortable cargo pants? The style on this person is phenomenal.
I will relay that to my wife, who helps me get dressed every day.
Bless her. All right. So speaking of which, how are you all? How are your families?
Do you have big news to share?
Things are going well. My wife, Dira, often comes with me when I come to these. She has been working overtime because Pride Month is a super busy time. And over the weekend, y'all probably know we're in San Francisco. You know, we had the largest Pride flag in San Francisco. It was the laser lights, which was wonderful. And because it was the 20th anniversary of the Winter of Love, when Gavin Newsom was marrying LGBTQ folks, just like marrying folks in 2004, it was the 20th anniversary of that. And so we got married along with, renewed our vows along with Stuart and John, who NCLR did a lot of work, and so we were happy to participate, but that was Friday. So I said, you know what, why don't you go ahead, and this isn't your job, so why don't you go ahead and hang out at home tonight? So.
Outstanding.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm honest, like, you know, life is lifing sometimes. Shortly after I was here, my wife's father passed away at the end of last year. And I think for us, it's been a lot of that, that feeling of what it means to be in the in-between, right? When we're like now officially adults, right? We have to do the adult things. And we have a young child that's about to turn 3 years old. So I think at every moment, I feel like, especially with the way the world is politically, like there's a real understanding of how fragile things are and how you can't take anything for granted. And then also about like how every moment and every second you have got to squeeze every bit of joy from it that you can, because we just don't know. No one knows how long we have promised. And, you know, I just feel like I'm in one of those reflective stages of my life.
I love it. I love this version. I love it.
So, of course, San Francisco Pride was over the weekend. You had a massive celebration. That's amazing. Congratulations. How did the joy that is the foundation, the protest certainly, but there, I think fundamentally there is joy at the base of Pride, particularly being in a space where so many of us, you know, millions of people come through San Francisco, and this is a place where they can fully present as the wholeness of who they are. So how was that joy experience for you all this weekend, especially in light of the news we'll be talking about? From Thursday and so on.
Yeah. Well, some of you all were on the Pride float with me. So we got to have a lot of joy while we were marching down Market Street. We had a DJ that was popping. We sang "They Not Like Us" everywhere. And it was really special. And I think for me, when I think about Pride, it's about creating moments where we can feel that sense of power, right? Because once you feel it, you can't unfeel stuff like that. And then the question is, what does it look like for me to bottle that or keep that memory in my bones and in my muscles so that when I'm at work or when I'm at school, I can remember what it feels like to be powerful and start to create those spaces. And for me, Pride was all of that. And I got to do Pride here to round out Pride Month, but I also got to be at Prides all around the country. I went to like little cities and mid-sized cities, and to see more people turning out than ever before was so special. I was at Lansing Pride. It's the third year they've done Pride in Lansing, Michigan. Sorry, some of you are not Midwesterners, so I should say that. Lansing is in Michigan, and Lansing's on the east side of Michigan, so it's a little bit more conservative than than the west side of the state. But anyway, so I'm in Lansing, Michigan. It's the third year they're doing Pride. The last year they had about 3,000 people show up. This year, there were 20,000 people at Lansing Pride. 20,000 people. And that's not by accident. That's because they're doing the work and people are showing up. So I think that there's a lot to be hopeful about. And I'm also like so excited because Pride, I keep calling today June 31st. All right, we gonna keep it going. Pride doesn't stop.
Oh my goodness. I always make these jokes that, oh my goodness, Pride Month, they're so busy and it's so hard. And it is. There's a lot going on when you do this for work. June is a very busy time. But every time I say that, I'm saying it with just like a bit of tongue in cheek, because there was a time that I was wondering if I could live my life openly queer. I remember what it was like. And I think like many folks remember what it was like when you made a choice. If this is going to be something, can you be this person? And to be in this position, I remember the previous executive director of NCLR. I remember the first time I met her, and I was a young queer, and I was like, my hand was shaking when I hi Malia. My hand was shaking when I met her, and so every Pride that I get to be out and open and talk about what we're doing and how we're changing the world, that's not something that I ever get used to. And so being able to go and talk about work, it's so much fun to see folks like experiencing. I said that my wife and I renewed our vows and we're wearing dresses, and folks came over and they were just like saying there's always something so beautiful about seeing two women in dresses, like in wedding dresses. It was so fun to do again. I wasn't expecting that. But it's also such a pleasure to talk about the work that we do to make our lives better. Not just that we are living here, but there are folks that have dedicated their lives about building something that we don't see today, but we are going to see tomorrow. And being able to tell people that, it's such a pleasure that I get to spend my entire June. And so when I'm saying like, oh, it's so hard and it's so, I feel like this is such a privilege and a pleasure that I get to do. So, yeah.
So I'd like to, we have to pivot. But I think it's so important to start with the positives, the joy, the power, the beauty of Pride and what it means to so many, like everyone in this room and so many people beyond. Because I found myself asking, with the current state of the race, that joy, that power, it feels like that's been sucked out of the conversation, especially after the debate. And for me, it wasn't even the debate, it was the next day, where you had like the people scampering about saying, oh no, the sky is fully falling and democracy is dead. I'm like, it was a debate, y'all. Like, we have issues that matter. Can we step through this? So what are some things, the lessons of Pride for you all? What would you advise those who are navigating these campaigns, navigating election 2024, what could they learn from Pride?
Well, wow, we run away from each other real quick as progressives sometimes. I mean, that was a shocking thing to me. I'm glad that since Thursday, people have taken a deep breath. And it feels like we're in a little bit of a different mode. But one thing that I feel like has become so clear, especially over the last few days, is the stakes of this election, right? Mm-hmm. Today, the Supreme Court said that Donald Trump, because that's who they were talking about, has total immunity to quote unquote official acts that he did while president. Official acts like inciting an insurrection on the United States of America. Official acts like sending his vice president off to a makeshift guillotine at the Capitol, right? Like, that's scary when we think about the future of this country. And we were talking about this, that this is the tough part of being in an experiment of democracy, right? We are in the middle of testing it in ways that are profound right now. When this Supreme Court is putting out decisions like that one day, a couple days ago, through the Chevron decision, gutting the ability of agencies and experts to actually impose regulations that make hot dogs safe for us to eat. Again, I'm from the Midwest, so you'll get a lot of hot dog references every now and then. To all that they've done around gutting affirmative action and gutting voting rights. Like, this is a challenging moment. So, yes, I think that this election is really important. And I think that people are even more clear about the stakes as some of the nightmares continue to play out in front of us. And at the same time, I think it's also important to really listen to people. And I think sometimes as progressives, when people are like, oh man, the economy's so bad. We go, here's a fact sheet that says it isn't. Look at these data points. And we can't do that. You can't fact people into feeling better about the way the world is. I got a Big Mac the other day. It was like $12. Like, that is not a world that feels like the economy. Yeah, you went, you saw, it was high. It was real high.
Was
and that was like $13. That's fresh fish.
Was it
right?
a value meal?
No, it wasn't on value.
No.
It wasn't on value.
No fries?
I got nothing else with it. Yeah, even the little soft serve is like $3.99.
That used to be on like the dollar menu.
Exactly. So when I tell you, you cannot show somebody a jobs report to make them believe the economy is well, like you got to be looking at the ways that people live. And I think the opportunity in front of us is we got to be clear. There are pragmatic things we have to do this year to preserve and protect democracy. And at the same time, if there's anything I've learned, particularly over the last couple of years, is that we cannot be afraid to reimagine the future of democracy. Right?
Yeah.
Like, before I came to the Human Rights Campaign, I was at Planned Parenthood for about 13 years. And I remember that there were so many conversations that we would have around how our job was only to protect Roe, knowing that even with Roe v. Wade as the law of the land, you had State Bill 6 in Texas, right, that created citizen vigilantes that basically outlawed abortion access. You had women in the South, particularly, that did not have access to abortion care because of the Hyde Amendment that prevented the use of federal funds for that particular type of health care. There were so many ways that Roe was the floor and not the ceiling for what access looked like, but we were afraid to push and division and to fight for more. Now we're at a point where so many of the basic laws that we took for granted have shown how fragile they are, especially with the Supreme Court. The opportunity on the other side is to not be bound by what we're afraid of, because what we're afraid of is already playing out. The opportunity here is actually to allow ourselves to reimagine what a democracy that's truly by and for the people, for all of the people, can look like and feel like. And there's more opportunity to do that than ever before. I'll just give you the one example of the Supreme Court. Talking about court reform 4 years ago, people would have called you foolish and outlandish and sent you out of even Manny's, right? But now it's a common course of conversation. Talking about universal basic income before 2020 would have sounded outlandish and unbelievable until you have the global pandemic. So out of crisis always comes this opportunity for transformation. The question is, what do we do now in this moment to actually not just deal with what happens in November, but to really charge ourselves with that task of transforming into the democracy we could have always been?
Excellent. Imani? You were clearly a minister. You are Pastor Kelley for sure. Absolutely.
I always forget that I'm on it whenever I'm listening to Kelley. I always just love hearing you speak. I really do. I tell you this every time I hear you speak. Absolutely. But I think that it's really, and I also want to name too, Kelley and I do different jobs, and I run a C3, which is a nonpartisan. So I'm going to try to be super, super careful here. So I want to be really, really clear about that. But I do think that it's really important that while we are in the times that we get scared, and this happens with everything, in the times that we get scared, we start rethinking everything that we're doing. And I think that that's something in this moment we need to be really thoughtful about, because our job is going to be a harder one. It's always going to be harder. We are on the side of justice. We are on the side of civil rights. And so we are the folks that are educating folks. We are educating people. People understand how the most oppressed people are experiencing the world because of the work that we're doing. And that part is incredibly important. So that means that our opponents are often creating the narrative, and we are finding ways to follow up. Now, what we have to be really careful about is that when that happens, it's always scary. When you go somewhere, you're going to do a presentation, and you get there, and the other people, you see that they did a PowerPoint, and you didn't do a PowerPoint. So all of a sudden, you are rethinking everything that you did. You are rethinking everything. You're trying to figure out how you can do a skit or figure out something else. When in actuality, what you need to do is lean back and rest on the work that you've done. That's what we need to do in this moment. And we have to make sure that what we're doing is based in strategy. I'm so grateful that we are in such close communication with other organizations. I'm so grateful that you called us together on Saturday morning so we could talk and figure out like what we need to do next. And that's the type of leadership that we see now. That's the type of leadership that we have. And so I think in these moments when we are afraid, when we think that it's time to go and do something wild, that maybe let's hold back a little bit. Let's figure out what we can actually do, how we can be strategic and do the best for our people. And remember that we're based in this. Organizing is something we made. They didn't make this. We know how to bring folks together. We know how to listen to our communities. And it is harder for us. And so, yeah, we get it wrong sometimes and we don't do it quite right, but it's because our job is harder. But that also means that when we win, it's going to be better, and it's going to be better for us, and it's going to be better for everyone. And so I think in this moment, that's what I really want to be thinking about.
So, just to give you a kind of behind the scenes thing, when we were planning for the event, Clint, where are you? Amazing. He was kind enough to say, okay, what about these issues? Let's talk about that. But the beauty of this stage is, at least for me, I follow the flow. So I know there were questions that were in the emails, and there were so many emails, but we're going to be going all over the place.
I didn't have time to read emails.
Perfect. So one of the reasons, possibly the reason I was so just like, yes, excited for this event is to have two Black women leading these landmark organizations at a moment where there seem to be contravening forces. On the one hand, we talk intersectionality and we bring our whole person. But on the other hand, it feels like there's a push to say, no, these are our issues. This is the only issue we care about. Y'all handle your issue. And I wonder, as you all are doing your work, how are you bringing together affiliated organizations, like-minded, that are focused on all those aspects of you?
Sure. No. No.
That was honest. I like that. Well, one, when you talk about intersectionality, sometimes people ask me, like, how are you going to be intersectional in your work? I'm like, I show up Black, queer, and a woman every day. Like,
and
there's actually no other way. And as a mama, thank you for that. And as a person of faith, like, they're just ways that we bring it into the world every single day. And for me, I think one thing I'm very clear about is when we think about social change and making progress, that the way we've always been able to do it in a way that's sustainable and durable is about thinking about people who are most directly impacted by hurt and harm right now, right? When I was coming up as an organizer, they used to say, like, look, if your arm is broken, you're going to take care of that before you take care of the paper cut on your finger, right? And that's not to say that there's some way that it's not caring for the whole, but we tend to the part of our community that needs us the most because they're experiencing pain. One of the most pivotal examples of organizing that I learned was around the American Disabilities Act. A lot of folks hear about this theory called the curb cutout theory. But what it was that in the American Disabilities Act, one, that was a hard-won fight. I mean, people put their bodies on the line, their lives on the line to get that to be into our laws. And because of it, all of us actually receive benefits. Part of the ADA requires that there are curb cutouts on street corners for people who are living with disabilities to be able to get up and down for wheelchair access. But because it's there, if you got a stroller, boo, you can get on that curb. If you're carrying your little rolling suitcase, you can get on that curb. If you're coming from Trader Joe's or, God willing, Whole Foods, you can get up on that curb. But it's just one example of the ways where when you prioritize people who are most in need, you actually benefit the whole. And I think for us, especially being Black queer folks, as movement leaders are joined by other people like Kara Johnson at the task force, or Melanie Willingham Jagger at GLSEN, or James at Family Equality, or David Johns at National Black Justice Coalition, to have there be a lot of us that understand that as the only way to make change is truly powerful. So I'm excited about this moment, and I also think it's a moment where this sort of leadership is desperately needed, because why would we be afraid of anything? I mean, things are hard right now, But if you tell me this is the worst it's ever been in America, I'm going to say you a damn liar, right? Like slavery, the genocide of Native American people, the gutting, the Jim Crow era. Like, we have endured all of this, and yet we are here. How dare we say this is the worst it's ever been when our ancestors have fought tooth and nail for us to be able to get to this moment, to be the ones who survived. So I think that there's something really powerful about understanding that this is a moment in our history that is deeply challenging and also decisive when we think about our direction moving forward, but it's also the one that we've been called to. There's something joyful about that. I'm glad to be a part of the movement of people, including the people in this room. They're going to tell the story for what's to come.
You know, to add to that, I think it's important that we talk about representation, the importance of representation. It is important, but it's not everything. And I say that because during a time when you are looking for folks that that we want to represent more parts of our community, it is important that we recognize that people need to also be good at their jobs. And I say that because the first thing that when folks are talking about this, very often they're talking about representation, but they're not talking about that you actually need to be good at your jobs. And the problem with that is that when you put the most underrepresented folks in positions, our reputations just aren't as flexible. And so if you put people in positions that they're not ready for, that they're not the best for, then it's going to hurt them in a way that's going to hurt them in ways that they will not be able to come back from like their counterparts, but it also hurts the movement. And so I think it's really important that when we talk about representation, and there are things about the way that we live and the way that we've grown up that I think gives us a perspective that might be different than what previous leadership looked like, but that it actually matters that we know what we're doing and we have a vision for what we're doing. You know, I just shared with someone earlier, I'm the first non-lawyer to lead the National Center for Lesbian Rights, which is pretty wild to some people because there's a social worker leading a law firm, and that can sound pretty weird, and I get that. I get that. It sounds a bit weird. And instead of concentrating on, well, what are you going to do if you're not? I spent so much time when I first got here explaining to people what I'm going to do because I'm not a lawyer. And I spent so little time talking about, well, what am I going to do that's going to be different than someone else? And how incredibly important it's been that I am someone, I said, you know, I'm not a lawyer. There's some things I'm going to have to get up to speed on. But once I get up to speed on them, I'm going to be able to explain this to someone who doesn't understand it. And that part's important. You know how hard it is to learn what due process is when you didn't go to law school, how to apply these things? And that is just something that our law firm never had to do before, and it just made it different, made us have to think about something. And so I think representation is something that is important, but it's not everything. And then I just want to also say something about intersectionality, and that is that we say this word a lot, but we don't always talk about the same thing. When people talk about intersectionality, they often say that, you know, it's hard when you are, you know, part of an underrepresented group and there are multiple intersections and multiple marginalized identities, but it actually doesn't get to the crux because, I mean, if I had 7 minutes to go and take this, I would walk you through intersectionality.
Would you have a PowerPoint?
But it's just like, well, yes, ma'am, I do. I do have a PowerPoint. It's actually a pretty good one. But to talk about intersectionality, I mean, really, I'll give you just a little bit of a breakdown, but it's, you know, this was a term that was coined by an attorney, even though we talk about it like it's something that comes from public health or comes from sociology. But the idea here is that when we create systems, specifically in this one, it was employment protections, when we create systems that it is harder for people when they have multiple marginalized identities because systems weren't created for them. So the systems that were created don't end up working for them. And that's the part that's interesting because in the example that was the court case that actually coined this term, it was that this person experienced a special kind of racism and a special kind of sexism as a Black woman, and so she wasn't protected by employment protections. And so it matters that when we talk about intersectionality, that we're not talking so much about the people, but we're talking about the systems that we create and who falls through the cracks. And so when we are thinking about being intersectional, yes, it matters that people are in positions of power, like I think Kelley and I really enjoy doing our jobs. I think we're
Our
really
black
good at 'em.
jobs, yeah.
Our black. I was worried
Oh,
that was
that's
gonna come
right.
up. We're doing our black jobs, y'all. And it means a lot to us that we're able to do this work. But that's just the first step. It's getting in there, but it's also creating an opportunity for people to be in these positions after us, after they feel like, okay, well, we've gotten a black woman in there. What else do we need to do? It needs to be really easy for someone to come into these positions after us, because that's what it means to be intersectional, to create a system where there's no longer barriers there. And so when we talk about these things, it's not just having people that represent you, it makes it easier for people to be in these positions after you.
Oh my goodness. I feel like we need like our own little Holy Ghost choir every time, because you two are amazing. And like the back and forth is beautiful. But let's build on what you were just talking about. Like, thank you, one, for clarifying what was really intended by the idea of intersectionality. I think so many of us were like, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, intersectionality, what? And then we just run with it. And thank you for the shout out for Black Twitter, Black Jobs, that brought me joy this weekend. What should we be doing, organizations like yours and those of us who are plugged in and politically engaged? Because, you know, as we were talking earlier, I was telling you how frustrating it is when people keep talking about how this is a vibe election and they're not paying attention. They just are going on how they feel. And I'm like, no, there are issues here to actually talk about. But that's a sizable contingent of the electorate. So what should we be doing, or what are your organizations doing to engage, you know, the apathetic vibe voter, or the one who doesn't see much difference or any change, so why even bother?
Well, for me, I feel like if you, and I'm going to start with talking about the presidential, because I think oftentimes when we're talking about this, we're looking at the top of the ticket. But I will say, like, especially when you go closer and closer in local politics, like I've seen people be more engaged than I ever have before, because they understand that local politicians, their school board, their city council, their state representative, their mayor, that they have a dramatic impact on their day-to-day life, which is a powerful thing. And I actually think this year you might see a reverse trend that we usually see in political cycles. Normally the goal is to have your top of the ticket turn out hard, and then everybody down the ticket benefits. I think this year you'll see a bottom-up election, right, where the compelling nature of some of your local candidates will actually drive turnout up the ticket. That's why for folks that were here to see Malcolm Kenyatta running statewide in Pennsylvania, young, dynamic, like a prophet of an organizer, right? First out black man to run for statewide office in Pennsylvania can help Joe Biden, because if he stimulates turnout because he's so captivating and compelling and engaging for that next generation of leaders, that could be the force that you need to get Joe Biden over the finish line. So I think that there's some of that dynamic at play, and there are really, like, the Democratic bench is actually quite strong when you look at people that are running across the country. I think about Michelle Rayner. She's running for state representative in Florida. When she was elected, yes, when she was elected, she was the first black lesbian to be elected in the state. I think about, you know, incredible folks like Sarah McBride in Delaware. When she's elected, she'll be the first out transgender member of Congress, right? Like, there's really compelling things that are happening. Even to flip the United States House of Representatives, two of the people, we need 4 seats to flip it. 2 of them could be out gay men. I'm talking about Will Rollins here in California, Mondaire Jones in New York. That is unprecedented when it comes to United States politics. There's a lot to be excited about. And I think that some of us, especially, I'm hoping, I've seen more people inspired after what we saw Thursday night, but we got to come out the closet for Joe Biden, y'all. We got to come out the closet. We can't just be saying, oh, ho hum, you know, Trump is so terrible. We have to be standing by this president, standing by Vice President Kamala Harris and what they have delivered. And at the end of the day, if you care about LGBTQ plus issues, they have been the most pro-equality administration we have ever seen, full stop and period. Look at Karine Jean-Pierre, look at Pete Buttigieg, look at Admiral Rachel Levine, look at the Respect for Marriage Act, look at even when Barack Obama was president, who was the one that said marriage equality should be the law of the land first? Joe Biden. Put some respect on that man's name. So But this is a time where I think we can't just kind of stumble into the election. Those of us that know his record, that know their record, we're going to have to start standing on business here, letting people know that he is actually a candidate for us to be proud of. He's not only the only choice that we've got. So that's, I think, a big piece about shifting the dynamic going into the election. And at the end of the day, 70 million people, and this is really depressing. You could have a potato running against a Dalmatian. 70 million Americans would vote one way or the other, no matter what. For the presidential, the election is going to come down to a handful of people, a couple thousand people, tens of thousand people in a handful of states. So what we've got to do is focus on turning those people out. And I think some of the strategies we've got to use are telling people that we're actually excited about this election, creating an environment where it's not just like vote because it's so hard, but it's actually going to be fun. Let's all go out and do it together, and reminding people of our power. Because at the end of the day, when you look at all the things that are happening in the world, fear and anxiety could cause people to stay home, and that's how we lose. When we show up, we win. When we show up, we win. That is the only way to go about it. And there are 75 million voters across this country that prioritize LGBTQ plus issues when deciding who to vote for. I know, 75 million.
Wow.
If I had that much money in my bank account, I'd be a happy camper, let alone that many people that turn out to vote, right? 75 million is equivalent to the number of registered voters in every battleground state combined. So if we turn these folks out, we will win. And that's the power that we've got.
First off, are you on speed dial for the president and the vice president? Because I mean, one of the things, like, Friday was so frustrating, to your point, because the whole fear and loathing mindset, it literally was like everybody had a think piece. Everyone was like, oh, whoa, democracy is dead because of a debate. Oh, like the emails coming out of the campaign, the tone was no one wants to vote for desperation. You know, you want you want to be inspired. You want to at least say, I'm voting for this. I'm voting for a vision of a better country. What you just shared is that vision. Is the campaign listening?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. One, I think when you saw the aftermath of the debate, I was flipping back between like CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. And anytime you hear the same message on MSNBC and Fox News, we're in trouble, right? Yeah. Like, they were saying the same thing. But the difference about Fox News was they were saying, well, surely Joe Biden can't be the nominee because if he weren't to make it his full term, Kamala Harris would be the vice president. Kamala Harris would be the president. So we know what they're saying. They're using racism, sexism, and misogyny to make people afraid of what could happen in the course of his presidency. And that, to me, really shows that what's happened here is that we're falling into a trope, right? That this isn't about Joe Biden. It's about undermining our ability to win this election and defeat Donald Trump. So I think that to me was really telling when I saw both of those narratives play out. And, you know, I just hope that I have better friends if I have a bad day at work than some of the people I saw talking. But I think the other side of it is that they've got to get out and listen to voters. I think we've seen that. You know, Joe Biden went to Morehouse College and did the commencement speech. He was in North Carolina the next day. Like, we saw the Joe Biden that can make it on this campaign trail being out and being strong. I think we need to see more of that. And we also need to be continuing to listen to voters. Because as proud as I am about the Joe Biden record, I also look at voters. Like my little sister, she's 27. She turns 27 on July 5th. And in her political kind of awakening, she's seen just such anomalies happen that aren't normal to our political processes, right? Barack Obama was an anomaly in a lot of ways, him being this kind of like charismatic figure that we felt we would follow into anything, right? Then you had Donald Trump be the opposite end of that anomaly in terms of a charismatic candidate, but in the opposite direction. Then we got a federal government that shut down many times, like every other week it felt like. You saw impeachments happening as a regular point of business. You see the current president with 34 felony indictments. Like, this is not normal. So I think that part of what this election is trying to make politics boring again. And to get there, we have to realize that I don't care who is running for president. They are not the hero of this story. The people of America are the hero of this story. The voters in America are the heroes of this story. And that's what I think we need to tell people. Because Joe Biden is a pragmatic means to an end to helping us advance democracy, but it's the will of the people that will always be the most important part of our democracy.
Awesome. I love that. I love that. You know, I think it's also important that that we're really thoughtful about the words that we use, because something that we hear a lot is apathy in voters. And I think from our vantage point, that's what it looks like. But actually, I don't believe that that voters have apathy at all. I actually don't feel like that's actually what's going on at all. I think more than anything, it's that there are folks that feel like there's a system that's so broken that their needs can't be met. That folks feel like their needs won't be prioritized, and that's why folks don't are having a difficult time in this moment. But what's exciting about that is that they care a lot. And you can't teach someone to care, but what you can do is direct folks and what they can do, what their caring gets them. And I think that is an opportunity for us in this moment. Is what does it take? What can we show you? What do you get with your caring? What can your caring do? What can you accomplish with that? We need to talk about what it takes to get to that next step. That change, we need to explain what the pace of change is. And I think that that's something, as you know, I think, you know, a lot of us start this work and we feel like we are young people, we are the new generation, and then suddenly we're not. What does it look like?
Who are you talking about?
It's just like, me, not you. What does it look like? What did we appreciate? You know, when we were young folks, and we were the folks that people were like, you're going to change things. I was so grateful for folks that took me under their wing, that taught me what this means. To what does it mean to organize in a time like this? What does it mean to say something doesn't just change overnight? What does it mean to be part of creating something that is bigger so that we can change? And I want to make sure that we're doing that for young people. You know, I really appreciate what you said about, you know, there are folks that aren't going to be excited about who's at the top of the ticket. That's always going to be the case. But if you want to feel like you can overthrow your government, like, get in there and elect people to your city council. Get in there and elect people to school boards. You know, we just settled the Don't Say Gay or Trans case in Florida, you know, and I was thinking, what if we did, but there's a dozen more out there in other states. What would it take for us to organize in these communities, create so that we know who's going to be on these school boards, and so they're out there saying how they're going to protect trans kids? Like, what if that's the work that we're doing? How beautiful is that we can take, again, our organizing skills that come from us, from folks in civil rights that are getting together to make sure to take care of all of us. That can be the work that we're doing. And I love that is something that we can do in this moment. So I'd love to see us do more of that, and be really thoughtful that it's not apathy that we're feeling, but there is something that we can use. And this is an opportunity to not forget that voting is a tool that we can use. And it's not the only tool, but it's an important one. And that it can get us something bigger, you know? Like, if we want to see something bigger, let's not say that we can't do things. You can do anything. We just need to make sure that we're doing something in a way that is thoughtful, that is strategic, and that we can actually get there. Because, you know, these are our lives that we're messing with. And so we deserve better. We deserve the time that it takes to get there.
I love that. Thank you so much. I wish we had more time. I have so many questions, as always, but I want to make sure we hear from our audience. I know you all are so excited because these dynamos up here are amazing. So my colleague here, Luis, has the disco mic. I will point. He will hold the mic. We ask, please, questions, 60 seconds. We want to hear from as many of you as possible. Starting here. It's a very fancy mic, too.
This question is really more for the audience than for the speakers. I can't help but respect Black women and your leadership and how you are the backbone of the Democratic Party and got Joe Biden elected at enormous personal risk, whereas white women voted for Trump in the majority in both 2016 and 2020, and we wouldn't even be having this conversation. if we weren't so concerned that they'd be voting for him in the majority in 2024. So my question for the white women like me in the audience, as well as for the white gay men, what are we doing to vote with and for Black women, global majority women, so we can finally have the democracy that we need?
I mean, she didn't direct it at you, but would you like to?
I would just drop my mic.
Right.
I mean, I appreciate that, right? And I think for me, I've been on a good amount of television over the last couple of months, and they keep saying like, well, are black folks, they talk about Black people as a whole, are you going to turn out and vote? And I'm like, yeah, we do every time. What you talking about? You know, and I think that we have to take responsibility, all of us, for our own communities and turning folks out. And as much as we can do as organizations, the single greatest thing that gets somebody to turn out is somebody they know asking them to do it. That's the single greatest thing. So we all have to take responsibility for that. And especially, you know, you got a cousin, you got an auntie, you got somebody that's not quite right on stuff. Talk to them, because they are more likely to listen to you than they are to any person on this stage.
Absolutely.
And thank you for that.
Did anyone in the audience want to share their thoughts? Okay. Carolyn, you always have something to say. Okay. If you don't know, this is Mayor Pro Tem of El Cerrito, Carolyn Weisinger. Yes. And don't believe her when she says she doesn't have anything to say. There is always something to be said. See?
The only thing that I would say was don't make it so much as a big deal as voting with Black women as much as it is educating white men and women. You know, the big problem in the Democratic Party is that Black women are the backbone, and we'll proudly do it. But, I mean, we shouldn't have to bear the whole burden of educating everybody. Yeah. So the only thing I would say would be to organize your own white people and tell them what to do. Don't involve us in it.
Outstanding. All right, this gentleman here in the front.
Is mic on? Oh. Yeah. All right. I think this was just more than a bad debate. I mean, if you look at the polling, 72% of the people in the poll immediately taken after said they don't think Biden has the mental capacity to continue to serve as president for another 4 years. You also mentioned that this is progressives turning on each other, but was he ever really a progressive? I mean, this is the guy who voted for the Iraq War, voted to make credit card debt much harder to discharge in bankruptcy, for the crime bill, for the fiasco that was Anita Hill's hearing. I mean, given that this is a hold your nose vote, from a progressive point of view, I don't see it. Honestly, I think the third party candidate has just as much chance as Biden has, based on what happened last Thursday.
Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, look, this is a real sentiment that a lot of people have. For me, I think the debate gives you some information, but at the end of the day, I'm not looking at the pundits on MSNBC to decide this election. I'm not looking at New York Times editorial columnists to decide this election. I think we're looking at voters to be able to get to decide. And really, I think when you look at the debate, I don't think anybody won it. Joe Biden, I think, said substantively what he needed to say. I saw something on Twitter. It was probably Black Twitter because they're the best. But they said something like, Joe Biden told the truth quietly, and Donald Trump told lies loudly, right? Like, that's what I actually saw play out. And I don't think it was a good night for him. I don't think that anybody is going to say that. But I also don't think it was a good night for Donald Trump. He showed himself to be the same Trump from 2020 that we saw time and time again, when he refused to answer whether or not he would support the outcome of a fair election, when he refused to say that what happened on January 6th did not uphold the Constitution. Instead, he talked about the weather on January 6th and that water was good that day. Like, he just totally evaded the major things that people are caring about when they think about this election cycle. So yeah, I think the debate, again, wasn't his best day, but I don't think it was Donald Trump's best day either. The question for me is now, how are we going to make the case to voters about what is at stake and what the choices are? And at the end of the day, look, primary voters in most states have already made their choice. it is very likely that Joe Biden is a presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party, and there aren't a lot of pathways for that not being the case that don't devolve our party and our election into total chaos. And that's why I kind of bring up that point about Fox News, how they're actually taking that step of reinvigorating racist and sexist and misogynistic narratives around Kamala Harris as a way to say you don't even want her to people that are listening, which is scary in a lot of different ways. Because again, the Constitution is set up so that you do have a vice president. So for me, I can only tell you my experience. I come back to the issues. I started on abortion. That was kind of my main issue as an organizer and an activist, being at Planned Parenthood for so long. And Joe Biden didn't say the word abortion until about 2022. But he is saying it now. Joe Biden voted for the Defense of Marriage Act in the 90s, right? Outlawing same-sex marriage. And now he signed the Respect for Marriage Act into law. So I'm not saying that he's a candidate that has every single one of my progressive ideals embodied at every moment, especially not over a long political career. But what I do believe is I trust him. He's a man of integrity. He's someone that I feel like, even if we're not aligned on the substance, that he will listen and be pushed by constituents and community members that actually engage with him. And that's what I value most about Joe Biden. Because electing the president isn't necessarily about bringing us back to the Obama days when it felt like you had, Jesus Christ Superstar running, right? It's not that. It's about having someone you feel like you can work with. And I can confidently say that I believe that about Joe Biden in a way I fundamentally don't about Donald Trump, especially someone that has said he would be a dictator on day one. Now having the powers that the Supreme Court has granted to the president is so terrifying to me. But I do think that we have to get to a place where people don't feel like you're just holding your nose in this election, because I don't think that that's actually a way to show up and vote. I think that people should really talk about the substance, talk about what's at stake, talk about the candidates, start to get ourselves to understanding that in a lot of ways in front of us, it is a binary choice of who is going to be elected. And then we've got to make choices and decisions. But even more than I trust Joe Biden, I trust voters. I have to, right? Like that to me is the whole story of democracy.
I mean, we're a see-through. I have to be very careful about this. So, I have to be very careful about this. But we just want to. We need to protect folks. We need to protect folks in the best ways that we can, and we need to protect folks in the best ways we can. I'm a C3, y'all. But I would be happy to talk to you in more detail.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not one of the experts, but being here at Manny's, we have these conversations so often. We have so many people who are in the trenches. One, both of the dudes are old. The only difference is, if that's what you're focusing on, one's age was demonstrated in, what felt to me a little bit of confusion at the beginning, but still he got to his points quietly. The other guy, his age manifested in straight up lying, and he literally was like Clint Eastwood in a movie where he plays the old man who just doesn't want to deal with his neighbors. You ask a question, you don't even really get a response. You just get yelling or disregard or this dystopian nightmare fantasy of what America is, which we are all here today, and our presence disproves that on its face with absolute certainty. Secondly, I think all too often, and it's the American culture, it's the cult of personality in all of our various facets. But at the end of the day, the vote is for the Biden-Harris administration. And what that means, it's Biden plus all of these people, to my liking, people who respect expertise in science, as opposed to the Trump administration, also known as Project 2025. If you haven't read about Project 2025, take a deep breath, meditate, breath work, and go in.
Yeah.
It is savage, and they are very clear. And that clarity cuts through any kind of dithering on a debate. Thirdly, I asked the question, what does that say about the state of American democracy if a 90-minute debate, which we're not going to talk about the moderators, so many problems with them, is the tipping point for what happens with the future of this multiracial democratic experiment we call the United States? It is absolutely ridiculous. We are saying democracy is at stake, but it's going to fall apart because of a debate? No, we have real issues. And it's up to all of us. You are here tonight. So you are part of this solution. All of us going out from here and talking, as you said, with our friends, our families, our neighbors, the person that we're stuck in the line with at the Target because they just closed down the self-checkout, about the issues. And then we take our friends, we have that conversation, we invite, we encourage, we all show up at the polls. And after we vote, we hold our elected officials accountable. So I'm so sorry. That's a bit of a soapbox, y'all.
I love it. Can I just add one thing? I think this is important that we say, when we are talking about the anti-LGBTQ bills, whenever we talk about what's happening with our community, we talk about the sheer number of bills that we're looking at. But we don't talk about what that means, how this is playing out. And for us, we're actually, you have actually a pretty great stat about how successful we've been at pushing against these laws. But what we don't talk about is that what's so incredible about when we win is that we are often in front of anti-LGBTQ judges. And the reason that we're able to win is because these laws are so discriminatory that even folks that don't want to vote for us, I'm trying to think how I can say this. We've been in situations where a judge has been like, is that the best expert that you have? Because they don't want to be on our side. That's a situation we have. And then that's at a trial court level. Then at the next court, the Court of Appeals, that's where we often lose. And that is because there's not a plaintiff talking to the judge and saying, "This is my life." When we're talking about trans kids that need health care, that need medically necessary health care, and they're saying, "This is just what I need." When someone's saying, "I'm just a kid that wants to play sports with my friends," all of these things, those impact even the most anti-LGBTQ judges. And that when there's not a plaintiff in front of them, that's actually when we end up losing. And so all these anti-LGBTQ judges were put in place by the previous administration. We want to make sure that whoever we are voting for is going to put pro-LGBTQ judges on the benches. And that means obviously SCOTUS too. There's so much to say about what's there. I did want to say something because you mentioned Project 2025. It's a 1,000-page document. If you have a week to go and ruin your days, go ahead and read it because it's scary. But the other thing is that it's already happening. But the part we don't always talk about with Project 2025 is this idea that they actually want to take away power from, and I'm gonna spend a little time with this. They're gonna sit in, y'all. They want to take power away from the president and give it to the Supreme Court. Now, this is concerning for a few reasons. One, we know what the Supreme Court looks like, and in any situation that we have a conservative supermajority on the Supreme Court, and we see that play out in everything that we're doing. But what is particularly concerning about this is that we've gotten used to what it looks like to win. We know that, like getting marriage equality, having decisions like Bostock, we got used to this. But we have to remember that when we got wins before, we didn't get these types of wins. The types of wins we got were because the president decided to not enforce DOMA. The wins that we got were out of executive action, was creating a HUD rule. So if you got money from HUD, then that means public housing, that means Section 8, that means you couldn't discriminate on sexual orientation or gender identity or marital status when we used to say that HHS, if you got money through Medicaid or Medicare or Medicaid, which is every hospital ever, that meant that you had to have protection so that you would let LGBTQ people come in and see their loved ones when they're in the hospital. That rule wasn't there before this executive order. The Department of Labor, we see this showing up other places too, but the federal government wouldn't enter into contracts with folks that didn't have non-discrimination in place. And that meant that, and these are great contracts. They're big contracts. There's a lot of money, and you're guaranteed to get paid. These are things that made a huge impact for us, and these are watershed moments for us, because what we forget, because we've seen some wins now, but those types of moments, that changes culture. that makes folks, that gets things on the ballot that would never be on the ballot. That gets people running for election that might never run for an election. That makes us think about a future that is possible that we never would have known, and it happens through those types of actions when nothing else is available to us. This is what they're trying to do, is make the Supreme Court impossible to protect our community, to find the ways that we've been able to put things together and protect our community and take those away as well. And then the Supreme Court decisions where they are literally rolling back protections, so the things that we've already won, they're trying to take it away. That is what is hidden in this horrible, scary 1,000-page document, and that part we don't talk about enough. And so this is something very, very serious for us, and it's about elections, but it's also just about fairness. It's also just about knowing that there are folks out there that, you know, what these book bans are doing, what these Don't Say Gay are doing, these are all of these things that I've just named, they're all part of the exact same plan. And we talk about, you know, and we talk about intersectional issues, but when we talk about CRT and when people say, you know, that these anti-woke acts and they don't believe in CRT, most people in this country don't even know what CRT is, which is ridiculous because what it's talking about is structural oppression, which is exactly what is happening with all of these things that's hidden in these books. And it would be ironic. This is what they write science fiction about, that they are killing you with the exact same thing that they say is hurting you. And that is what's happening for us right now.
That was a word.
Okay,
Wow.
Professor. They are killing you with the exact same thing they say is hurting you. Oh, you put it up? Can I just add one?
Go ahead.
I think the other thing is they are thinking about long-term strategies, right? So Project 2025 isn't possible without the Powell memo, right? Where Lewis C. Powell in the 70s said, look, in response to regulations that were coming out from the federal government, regulations related to seatbelts and car safety, automobile safety, regulations related to the tobacco industry, where they saw a threat to corporate power, they came up with the Powell memo. And the whole job of it was to figure out ways to strategically make the courts into a political conservative institution. That was 40 years ago. That's when, you know, companies were encouraged to spend 10% of their profits on actually shifting the political dynamics in this country. So if you think about where we are today, you have to know that this started 40 years ago to get us to where we are now. So then, if we want to figure out how to restore democracy, how to center our people and our rights, how to fortify ourselves against these attacks, we also can't we have to think about November, but it's got to be broader than that. And I remember one of my colleagues, he used to work for Congressman John Lewis, and he said he asked the congressman for some advice one day, and the congressman said to him, young people get tired too easily. Because when you think about some of the battles that we've won, these were not easy victories. I mean, the Montgomery bus boycott was 385 days. The Stonewall riots that we so often celebrate wasn't a single day. That happened for over a year. So when we think about what's coming up in this next fight, we have to have some endurance in this challenge ahead if we truly intend to protect democracy.
Excellent. So just wanting to respect the time, are you two comfortable with what we call rapid fire?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So what that means, we'll take 3 questions in succession. So definitely laser in on your questions, and our amazing guests will respond. So there was a hand here. Did I see one on the sofa? Okay. 1, 2, 3.
There's 4. Let's take them out.
All right. Kelley says we're going for it. What is it in poker when you run the house?
Okay.
Is that it? I don't know.
I was gonna say bluff.
I just wanted to thank our powerful speakers. My goodness, just listening the depth of the conversation, it is very impressive. And your moderating skills, Precious, very excellent. And what I really wanted to talk about is the lady that is sitting there, because she mentioned something to me that to me is fundamental. Her statement, in fact, or question was, yes, us black women on the ground, we know we've been doing this, we're gonna do that. But she posed a question to white women and white men that right now are going to be, okay, because this election is unlike any other election. And I would really like for the leaders to really take the statement that lady is trying to convey. It is so much important. I read the 2025. It's explosive, and I mean, the bottom line for folks that have not read it is they are going there, take away everything, and the implications even for the African American community, because we know they can get any jobs, they're in the federal government, they're gonna clean them out. That is a given. And there are provisions in there that you cannot even believe. But again, it's for this election. You have the African American women, and for the white women that are voting for Trump. That is a big deal, because then the margin of the error here and the margin of victory, that's what that lady. So I would really want it that is a takeaway, because we really now do or die. And lastly, the international implications. We're not talking about that here right now, because there is a global reset. You know, where we are today, it's not where we are 5 years ago. And this election, than every election, people say the best, you know, it's the most important in history or whatever. Take that seriously. There is a reset. Something is happening globally. And it's another conversation altogether, but which one that I know I'm versed and can lecture on that. If this election does not turn out the way that us here would like to, please bear that in mind. Something else is happening. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Yeah, thank you.
My concern is Gaza. Is that going to just put a wrench in the youth vote, or in generally, how's that? My concern is that it's going to affect it somehow. Are there any thoughts on that?
Okay, next, you take them all in a group.
Good.
Right here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just was saying I'm a huge Joe Biden fan. Agree with everything you all have said about the quality of his administration and what he's accomplished. I am also spooked, and I want to know. I want to open the dialogue about why not Kamala Harris, because I'm a little worried that particularly women are falling into the same misogynist trap. Why can't she win? Why not? And I think we should be having that conversation.
And who is the fourth?
Thank you guys so much. My question is, let's say with all the fear, very, given, let's say we flip the House and, we get the election that we want. What are some things that you might be excited about for these next 4 years?
Okay, so if I recall, we have global implications. We have the youth vote impact on that. We have why aren't we having the Kamala Harris conversation? And thank you for ending on this high note. Let's say we win everything. What do you want to see?
I can't, again, that's C3, so I can only do what I can do. But, I would say that I said earlier how important it is for us to recognize that when there are folks that are disillusioned or are not excited by candidates, that we have to find ways for folks to plug in. And I think that's going to be something that's always going to be something that's important. We have to find ways where folks are able to organize, that folks are able to be part of creating something. I said before, and I think that's really important, we do have an opportunity to overthrow a government by going and being thoughtful about what's happening in our local communities. Those are things that make a difference, and that is something that you legitimately, is a great way to cut your teeth, and it's a way that you can make change on social media by, you and your friends getting together really can make an enormous difference. I think that's going to be something that's really important. I think that it is. I'm not going to go in that. Vice presidents are there for a reason. Vice president, and I think we're seeing a lot of things. I appreciate that you said. I think we're seeing racism and sexism play out in a moment that it's being couched as something else, and that's something that's dangerous. And I would like to hear more people call that out, because that is what's happening. That's part of what's going on. What I'm excited about is being in a situation where we can push people to be, we can push our administration to be more inclusive than ever before. And, we are in a situation, it's a very odd place to be where you are looking at candidates where you've seen a track record, and it wasn't too long ago. I appreciate that you said, we don't always think about, this isn't the worst that we've ever been. I ran a small organization in Chicago in 2016, and I was rereading some of the speeches that I was writing in that time. And I remember one of the things that I was most afraid about is that in the first day of the last administration, they were scrubbing LGBTQ from the website, and that was something that we saw. And I remember, and that's so scary because, when you people that are underrepresented, if we don't have data about our community, then we can't protect our community. And in this country, data informs policy, and policy informs funding. And so we knew what that meant. And that it was also pretty exciting that, on the first day of this administration, that, we saw the Bostock decision that was for employment go to support, housing and education and healthcare. And it makes me think we could have something pretty amazing. We could do something that we've never seen before. And we can hold people some of this is a bit of a game. I wish that we had I wish that our elections were such that it wasn't tied up with your livelihood. It wasn't tied up with how you make a living. There are things about that just aren't set up for the best. But in a situation like this, I actually think that we could be set up for something pretty exciting.
Everything Imani said, always. I think on so I was at Davos earlier this year, which is like a global World Economic Forum. And this year there are more elections around the world than in just about any other year in recent times, right? There are like 60 elections happening. And even when you rule out like the dictatorships, they're not real elections. There's an incredible amount of electoral work that's going on. I mean, just the other day in France, right, you saw Emmanuel Macron's party lose to the far right and the far left, right? So you see these kind of global dynamics at play and taking out. And I don't even have to talk about the rash of anti-LGBTQ plus legislation that's been moving, or the terrible bills in places like Uganda. And at the same time, you have things we never would think possible, like same-sex marriage in Thailand, right? Like the island states, St. Kitts, the Dominicas, like actually getting rid of colonial era terrible legislation for our people that criminalize our rights and our lives. So I do want to say that this is a pivotal moment globally. And I think that when you talk about what's happening in Gaza and when you're talking about what's happening in the Middle East, I think we have a generation right now that's incredibly globally minded, that is concerned about the state of the world and the state of the country. And a lot of times I think when you ask a lot of political leaders about the situation in the Middle East, people will say, well, we've polled people and it's ranking number 9 out of 10 on the list. And again, I think that it's missing something about how deeply and passionately people feel about the role of the United States in the global context of democracy and of human rights. And to me, I think that people have a variety of perspectives on the issue and the substance, but this piece, that the United States has a phenomenal role to play in upholding democracies and human rights globally, is something that everyone is calling us towards. So I think that there's something to explore there and to listen to and to watch how it plays out in this election cycle, because I don't think that it will be a small factor. It'll show up in different ways, but I think it's important. And the one thing I'll say before I go to your other questions is I think that, especially with the way that the world is kind of playing out, we have to figure out how to hold feelings that are complex, even conflicting at the same time. Like, you can experience both joy and grief. You can experience both hope and despair. We can experience victories and still see setbacks, but still we have a choice to make. Are you going to choose, even in the midst of darkness, to find the light there? Because if we don't, that's where fear and isolation wins, and those are tools of the oppressor. So I think that this is one of those moments where there's a whole lot of shit playing out. Sorry, there's a young person over there. I am cussing a little bit. But we have a choice to make and to know that we are not without power. So when you think about Kamala Harris, I don't think that she is not a viable candidate to be president of the United States. That's not what I'm saying. I do think that there are certain areas of the rules when it comes to the Democratic Party that make it hard to do right now in a way that doesn't undermine our outcomes in this election. already primary voters in most states have decided who they want their delegates and nominees to go to for the convention. Right. Yes. Right. No, that's right. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you need 3,900 to clinch a nomination. There are 3,700 that are currently committed, 700 uncommitted. So in the rules of the Democratic Party, in the rules of the convention, there isn't a lot of way to actually stop this nomination from moving forward, and it would undermine the will of primary voters that have already turned out. That doesn't devolve it into chaos for the rest of the cycle. And if the party devolves into chaos, the only one that benefits is? Say it from the back, right? So that's, I think, the challenge of this moment and why it feels like that conversation is more of a distraction than actually about the serious nature of turning out voters this election cycle. And the other thing that I think that we should keep saying is, okay, there's a reason that you have a vice president. That person's supposed to be able to step in if something happens to you. And let me remind you, Donald Trump does not have a vice president because his would not sign up for him again, right? The American people already fired Donald Trump once. So I do kind of come back to this idea that for this year, right now, there is a binary choice in front of us. I mean, I will say it says something that Robert Kennedy in some polls is hitting, 15%, that you've got Jill Stein and Cornel West. I'm not saying in future cycles. I actually don't think that there's more opportunity to open up how we think about our party politics in this country. But in July of our Lord's Year calendar 2024, there are two choices, and one of them is going to be the president. So we have to be able to hold both short-term strategy and long-term vision. Again, hold two things that are complex and dynamic in one breath. And I believe that we can do that, right? And I think this is a real opportunity for us to start to talk about the sexism and misogyny. And I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit on a soapbox here, but Hillary Clinton, everybody loved her when she was a United States Senator. Everybody loved her when she was First Lady. But you trying to be president, boom, glass ceiling. Can't do it. There's something for us to talk about around the real things that are happening in sexism, in racism, in misogyny when it comes to the glass ceiling in politics that I actually think this is an opportunity to do and to validate Vice President Harris's role as Vice President of the United States of America right now. And the last thing I'll say is there's a lot to be hopeful about. I just keep coming back to this. Like, my whole life is not possible until this very moment. I think I said this to some of y'all earlier, but if anybody has a time machine, I'm not getting in it. Because there was never a time that was better to be black, queer, and a woman in America until right now in this very moment. And that's a powerful thing. And it didn't happen by accident. It happened because of all the work that Imani was talking about, all the work that you do in your Democratic clubs, all the work that folks have been doing in community for decades. So to me, this election is a very important one, and I think that it's actually pivotal that we stop thinking of candidates as our savior and put our faith back in voters, back in the people. And when we do that, literally anything is possible. The Equality Act can become the law of the land. We can raise the minimum wage to get it to a place where people can actually have a living wage, right? We don't have to have homelessness be a crime for people. There's so much that's possible if we get to the other side of this. And I think that what we're trying to do in this election is not just get a candidate elected, but remind people that we have the power to change our circumstances, but we're going to have to fight.
Woo! Okay. All right, I think we have our marching orders. We have the Amen Choir. The collection plate will be going around pretty soon for Reverend Kelley here. But can we just get another round of applause for the incredible
and a precious, incredible moderator.
Absolutely.
And all of you incredible audience.
Yes.
Wow.
So it is, I say that Manny's is a magical place, and Manny's like, oh, don't say that. He's cute. But this is really the only place, certainly in this country, if not the world, where you can come in and get comfortable, because this is our living room. You all are family. You are our guests. And we can have these incredible conversations, and you can get up close and personal with the genius that is on our stage tonight. Kelley Robinson, Imani Rupert-Gordon, excellent work with being a C3 and dipping and dodging and dipping and dodging. So good.
It's working.
Right. And to have the information here, to be able to feel empowered and hopefully inspired and a little less trepidatious. Because we have too much work to do, y'all. There is so much at stake and yet so much to be excited about, hopeful for, and change to anticipate. So with that, thank you all so much for coming out to Manny's. We'll see you again soon.